in Scotland. My name is Emma Boffey. I'm a solicitor here at CMS Scotland, and I have the great pleasure of facilitating the discussion today. Today's topic is one very close to my own heart. We know that it's a sector supporting over 200,000 jobs and worth over 4 billion per annum to the Scottish economy. So there can be no doubt in my view that it's a critical part of Scotland's economic resilience. One of the outcomes, a perhaps unexpected outcome of the COVID-19 pandemic, has seen more of us holiday in Scotland, perhaps have the opportunity to soak up some of our beautiful surroundings and experience what our country has to offer as a tourist ourselves. So as the Scottish tourism sector begins to recover from the impact of the pandemic, we're going to be discussing what challenges the sector faces as it adapts, remodels and hopefully rebounds into 2021. I can see that we've got participants joining from across Scotland today. Welcome. It's really lovely to have a representation from across the sector. I can see that we've got people joining from Perthshire, the Highlands and Islands, and also in the Central Belt. You're all very welcome and thank you for joining. Before we start the discussion, I would ask that all attendees mute their mics and turn their cameras off. That's just so we can ensure that we don't run into technical difficulties and that you can hear and see the speakers okay. Towards the end of the session, we'll hopefully have some time for questions. So when the time comes, please do let us know if you have a question by adding that to the chat function. So to kick us off, I'm really delighted to welcome our panellists. We are joined today by Vicki Miller, who is Director of Marketing at Visit Scotland. Vicki joined Visit Scotland in 2005 after 3 successful years with the Dumfries and Galloway Tourist Board, where she played a key role in that region's recovery post foot and mouth. Welcome, Vicki.
Thank you. Good to be here, Emma.
Good to meet you too. I'm also very excited to welcome Neil Robertson. Neil runs one of my favourite travel blogs. It's called Travels with a Kilt. And if you do anything today, I'd highly recommend that you subscribe to Travels with a Kilt. From his base in Glasgow, Neil seeks to unearth everything Scotland has to offer. His expertise lies in digital marketing, storytelling, and spreading the word on our world-beating offer to a wider audience, including many international readers. So welcome, Neil.
Thank you.
Thanks. And finally, I'm delighted to welcome my colleague, Gregor Farmer. Gregor works in CMS Croatia. Gregor is one of Croatia's leading attorneys for the hotel, tourism and leisure industry. Croatia has a similar population size to Scotland and a very vibrant tourism sector. So we'll hopefully hear in the course of the next hour how successful Croatia has been in firstly managing its economic expansion of the tourism sector over the last decade, but also what we can learn from its recovery from the pandemic in the summer. So to kick us off, Vicki, if I can start with you, I've heard 2020 be described as perhaps the year of just surviving rather than thriving. How do you see things at the moment and what lies ahead from the perspective of Visit Scotland?
Yeah, Emma, thank you. I would agree with you. It definitely is about survival. I think when the industry opened up on the 15th of July, I was certainly optimistic. We saw really strong intent and interest in Scotland, particularly from the UK market, which we knew was going to be really important in terms of that kind of early recovery post-lockdown. And in fact, we saw parts of Scotland, coast, countryside, self-catering sector in particular, actually do very well for a period in the summer. However, that is not reflected across the country. So we've seen the cities continue to kind of really struggle. They tended to, particularly during the summer months, benefit from international travels, very important. Places like Edinburgh, international visitors account for 40% of their visitor volume across the year, and a lot of that is in that summer period. So we've seen the cities really struggle, and hotels in particular as well, so the serviced accommodation. And many attractions and tour operators that have, and activity operators that have had to contend with the 2-metre social distancing, which has really either restricted capacity or in some cases meant that they actually haven't been able to open. So I think while there have been definitely green shoots, things that have been positive for some parts of the country and some businesses, and indeed there's been lots of innovation and collaboration, which has been some of the positives that have come out of this. I do feel that at this point, with some of the new travel restrictions that we have, some of the impact on things like food and drink, so the 6 o'clock curfew, not being able to serve alcohol with a meal, some of these more recent, unfortunately, restrictions have meant that I think it almost feels to me like we're back at restart, and we're not yet. Recovery is some way off. So I'll leave it at that as my. I think that's where we are now. As I say, there are some positives which we'll share through the discussion. But yeah, it's been a challenging period, and I think the last few weeks in particular have been particularly challenging for the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we first scheduled this webinar, Vicki, we just couldn't have predicted the additional restrictions that we'd be under now in October. It's an ever-moving feast. Neil, I wonder if I could ask you to come in here at this point. I know that you've been on the road for the last week, travelling up north. What's the mood like on the ground? How have you found things?
Yeah, I think it is very much consistent with what Vicki said, that a lot of regions have felt that the year has actually been, the summer part of the year was relatively successful. The business was coming in, particularly the East Coast regions, which have relied on staycationers more generally anyway, traditionally. They have seen the usual business turnover, but with the changes in the last few weeks, particularly around the curfew for dinner time, that has affected restaurants massively, and it just puts you off eating out. And even going on these kind of promotional trips that I've been on, it's just been much easier to self-cater. You just naturally lean that way. You can't have your dinner before and get everything finished for 6 o'clock. So there's a negativity around that. It's definitely going to see a self-catering boom. We saw a lot of wild camping, and the staycation market is going to be central to how we recover from this in the longer term. But it's not as simple as just seeing the numbers from the UK are going to compensate for the international numbers, because they do have different spending habits. Things do. They're a different kind of market in an entirety. So it is extremely complex. The mood has been very mixed, I think, as I say. Going to regions like Aberdeenshire, Fife, the borders, they've been relatively upbeat about how the summer has gone, particularly the rural areas. But as Vicki said, the urban areas, the cities have struggled. And the traditional international market customers that tend to do the Edinburgh, Glencoe, Loch Ness, Skye, Outer Hebrides trips, those big budgets that the international visitors bring, that hasn't been compensated, and they've struggled, and a lot of businesses haven't even bothered opening. So it's been a very, very tough year on the back of so many successful years as well. It's been a particularly hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And Gregor, I wonder if you can share with us how things are going in Croatia at the moment and how its summer has been.
Well, summer has been excellent in terms of weather, but tourism was obviously down. We had a growth rate of about 5 to 6% every year over the last couple of years. Croatia has become very dependent on tourism. About 20% of economy are tourism related. And this year we had a downfall of 32%. So it hits a lot of businesses. It's for some really a drama. And yeah, we are struggling with it. So we had kind of before COVID, we had rather the problem of over tourism, and now it's a rather under tourism. Kind of the only benefit being that you could once visit Dubrovnik with just a few other people, which is normally so crowded that you can barely enter it. But yeah, it hasn't been a good year for Croatia, and we hope that things will get better soon. We have opened our borders kind of to everyone, but other countries have blocked us. It was hitting us quite a lot that although Germany kind of stayed with us for a long time, but Austria said you can't, kind of when you travel to Croatia, then you need to go into quarantine when you come back. So this kind of was hindering people to come. And in the end, then also Slovenia, our other neighbor, was cutting off. So it was a very difficult year, but we hope that the measures we have taken in terms of certain tax benefits, certain kind of easy accessible loans and other stuff, whatever kind of other countries do as well, will show some effect.
Thank you, Gregor. That's really interesting. I wonder, Vicki, I read that there was over the summer period about a 40% increase in inquiries from, I guess, what we call the domestic market, so UK travellers, primarily looking for Scottish staycations. Do you think that's all about the pandemic, or was that a trend that we would have maybe seen anyway? I'm conscious of perhaps a move to a more sustainable and slower method of travel.
So the domestic market has always been really important to Scotland. So it's something like in a normal year, 13.8 million overnight visits are from within the UK. I think what we've seen with the pandemic is, interestingly, Scots staying at home, so that localisation trend and that, community spirit, so Scots wanting to support local businesses, which has been fantastic, and staying in Scotland. And something like 7 out of 10 Scots have actually holidayed at home, which has been great. Interestingly, I think as well, what we've also seen is some younger audiences actually enjoying Scotland for the first time. So what I would normally call colder segments, because typically our demographics have been sort of that 45 plus, not that anybody that's 45 is old, but older. Whereas actually what we've seen is younger families and just young people, millennials, enjoying Scotland and enjoying Scotland's outdoors. So I think these are really positive trends. Now, we've had some challenges that Neil referred to there around actually maybe enjoying the countryside, but not enjoying the countryside as responsibly as we would like. So I think the counter to that has been there's an education, there's education there about how to enjoy Scotland responsibly and to protect and look after our special places and respect local communities. But that actually, I think, is something that we can do. And in fact, we've actually made some inroads to come together, a number of organisations, and I've been chairing a marketing and communication group across a range of public sector organisations, looking at that whole area of visitor management and how we can improve communication, but actually how we capitalise on that trend of people for the first time enjoying Scotland and those younger audiences. How do we invite them back and continue next year? Because I think, we know now that it is going to take a few years to see the return of international travel. And so actually these trends, those localisation trends, this trend to sort of stay at home and enjoy countryside and be outdoors, I think are ones that we absolutely want to capitalise on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Neil, I guess you've got expertise in digital marketing and storytelling. How do you get that story across of enjoying Scotland, but in maybe a more sustainable and slower way, particularly for some of our younger travellers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting one because Scotland is not a cheap destination. It never has been. So millennials who perhaps don't have a huge amount of income or disposable income have an interesting challenge ahead of them. They're definitely more interested, I think, in going to the rural areas of Scotland and really tapping into the soulful side of Scotland. And that's where the storytelling comes in. On my side, yes, it's about the big important visuals, but it's about what does Scotland really mean to you deeper down than that. And if you're actually from Scotland, you've got a deep connection to the country anyway, of course you're going to be drawn to trying to find out about family heritage and regional heritage as well. And Scotland has got such a great history that tapping into that is very doable. But if we're going to really appeal to that market, we have to make things cheaper, and they're not perhaps going to be able to afford £100 a night plus for accommodation. They're not going to be able to afford the seafood dinners that Scotland is so famous for, the whisky tours and that kind of international brand that we've created. It is going to be a different element to the marketing, but we have to make social media a force for good in that sense. And social media is going to be particularly important, as we've said, to the younger audiences. So how can we utilise that with the big visual appeal that Scotland has, but really then turn it to what's beneath that? How can we get into the soul, and how can Scotland be the kind of experience destination that you're going to look forward to coming to, love it when you're here, and just talk about for the rest of your life? That is the kind of trip that we try to encourage for international visitors. We need to now do that for people who live here as well.
Absolutely. And Gregor, I wonder if I can ask, is this, the kind of movement towards sustainable, slower travel, and perhaps the younger generation staying at home and enjoying their Croatia, is that something that you've seen in your sector, or is there still heavy reliance on the international visitor?
Oh, definitely, we do see that in a couple, kind of from a couple of angles. There is certain towns try to be kind of super sustainable with having concepts for everything, limiting traffic, kind of good food. I mean, not just good food, but kind of a bio food, only limiting access for tourists. So just to avoid the downside of tourism. I heard this before. I think Vicki said it, kind of not appreciating the countryside as it should. Yeah, and we also see a focus on family tourism, not just to get the big amounts of Germans and Austrians and UK people in, but also because family tourism also means that you have kind of a bit of a calmer tourism. You don't have bars open long after midnight, so you avoid the kind of the big fuss that you may have somewhere down in Ibiza or so. Yeah, and we try here to also limit somehow, or not limit access, that's the wrong word, but kind of to empower local business as a more sustainable business, which we believe. And this empowerment is done by lower tax rates or lump sum taxes, so to encourage people to stay in farming, to stay in kind of renting out smaller apartments and hotels. And this kind of in the aggregate, I think should lead to what has been our motto for the last couple of years, the Adriatic as it once was.
Lovely, brilliant. I've heard talk of Scotland being naturally well disposed to marketing physical distancing because of its wide open spaces, and some parts of Scotland are still not very populated, and I suppose that appeals to many travellers, that remote aspect of it. Are we going to see a continuing push on that, wide open spaces, get outdoors from Visit Scotland?
Definitely. I mean, I think, as you say, it's always been a big part of the draw, our landscapes and our quality of our air. You think of as well things like the dark skies. There's it's always been a big draw. But I think what's really unique about Scotland is actually within our cities as well. And I think we've not to forget this, that actually you can explore, the hidden gems of our cities, and off the beaten track. And also our cities have some very beautiful spaces as well, outdoor spaces, parks, gardens, etc. So I think it very much is part of the story that we need to tell. And as I say, it always has been, but definitely something that we build on going forward.
Fantastic. And Neil was talking a little bit about the role of social media in telling that story. I've been reading a little bit about the concept of social closeness. So you might not be able to go to a whisky distillery at the moment, but we can tell the story of what you would experience there. In your view, should that be part of our strategy going forward to increase that coverage?
I think so, and we're going to see different technologies start to come more to the fore as well. People have been talking about virtual reality and augmented reality for some time. This just never quite made it for those kind of technologies yet. So I think this could be the nudge that it needs, although it's a very expensive technology, it has to be said. But that to set the scene in that sense for those who can't necessarily go to these locations, those kind of technologies could be very useful. Social media more generally in the storytelling side from that, most certainly. And that's what people are drawn to is the outdoors, but they still need somewhere to stay. So it's all very well saying, right, go to the middle of nowhere and you won't see anyone all day, but you'll still need somewhere to stay. You'll still need to eat. So the businesses do need to remain open, and in these remote areas, we then need to talk about the importance of local communities, particularly in island communities, and how they can be affected by the downturn in tourism, because they rely very, very heavily on it as an industry, as an employer. And if we are seeing what we have been seeing, which is an explosion in the marketing, the house price markets as well, that is going to price out a lot of young people from these areas, and those people would also be the kind of people that would typically work in tourism. So we may find that there's no scope to run tourism businesses in these remote areas because there's no staff. No one can afford to actually live there. If it's going to be all about second homes, then these areas are going to be an extreme challenge to go to because there just aren't any facilities there. So yes, certainly I agree that going to the remote areas is vital and something that we're definitely drawn to at the moment. But the industry needs to keep up with that, and the government needs to step in and help out if necessary for these particularly young people that live in these areas.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was interesting, Neil, just speaking there about the role of technology and things like digital and virtual tourism. Do you see that, Neil, as an alternative to that demand? So if you can't get here, you do this experience instead, or do you see that more as whetting someone's appetite? You can't get here, but come back next year, or is it a bit of both?
It probably is a bit of both, and as I say, I think we're a bit behind with virtual reality at the moment. We're not ready to start rolling that out across the industry. Compared to certain countries, particularly like Japan, if you walk down a street in Tokyo, you walk into virtual reality bars, it's becoming as common as an average bar in normal times anyway, and you could go in and have a kind of Westworld experience that's just blows your mind. We don't have that here. We're several years away from that, and someone needs to invest in this technology. So who's it going to be? And I've dabbled in it, and I've been an investor in certain businesses in that sense. But as I say, it's a good distance away. Augmented reality is cheaper, it's more doable, and we've had likes of Historic Scotland have had a great interest in that kind of thing. There's a definite scope for storytelling within that kind of technology, but it's expensive, it's time consuming, and as I say, I think it's more of a medium term thing in that sense. I think we're probably going to have to rely more on more traditional social media channels in the short term.
What do you think, Vicki? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, you're right. There is absolutely a place for, virtual and augmented for that storytelling, actually to enhance, maybe the experience when you're here. And certainly there is a role for it just now in terms of keeping Scotland top of mind. And as you say, it's like, here's what you could really enjoy, but there's nothing that is going to beat actually being here and having the experience. But I think for me, technology, more fundamental, it's about making sure that Scotland is discoverable. So we need everybody to have the mobile friendly, optimized websites with great content that we know that people are searching and looking for, improving, that digital footprint, making it easy for people to book. So I think there's some digital fundamentals in there that, technology absolutely plays a role. And obviously with COVID measures, we need people to often book in advance into an attraction. So for that kind of capacity management, it's become really important. So we've seen sectors like the attraction sector, many having to kind of use this use technology like that for the first time, which is great. It's expedited actually what we've needed to happen because of the kind of safety measures that we've needed to put in place. So I think it has many roles that will be an important part of our recovery and can do the inspirational bit right now as well. And we've seen lots of great examples. One fantastic example for me this year has been the Agri Sector, the agri-tourism sector, where a cohort of farms have come together and they've been doing live farm tours on Facebook. Now, it's had its challenges because not always has there been a signal, so sometimes things have gone wrong, but actually they have delivered really authentic visitor experiences, and people from around the globe have joined these live farm tours and actually setting their alarm to join them. And actually what we've seen there is that sector now looking at, okay, how do we do more of these in person? So as part of our recovery, is this a new product we can take to market? But a great example of how just using social media in a different way has really given profile to a very important sector.
Yeah. So perhaps the pandemic accelerating that trend again.
Absolutely.
A catalyst for it. And I think it's interesting what you say there, Vicki, about technology, not just being used for COVID-19 security measures, but actually driving that demand and creating, my book there that always says I love travelling around Scotland, but one thing that sometimes frustrates me is that we don't have necessarily a central portal or infrastructure to think, where am I going tonight, and where can I go to be responsible that isn't full already, and how can I make sure that demand is more evenly spread.
Absolutely, and I think so there is a key role there, and I think you're right in that whole visitor management area, and that's something that we've talked about, and we've talked before about over-tourism. That was an issue in certain places within Scotland pre-COVID. We've seen the countryside under a little bit of pressure in some places again during the summer. So how can we use technology to help manage that capacity and, point alternatives to people, to say, okay, it's full now, but why not try? So I think it absolutely is going to play a key role.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that takes us on nicely to my next topic. Neil, I was going to ask just for your views on, I guess, what does responsible travel and travelling with a purpose look like to you?
I think fundamentally for the traveller, it's about putting something in to get something back, rather than the mindset of, well, I just want to be somewhere remote and I don't want to spend a huge amount of money. I just want to go to the hills and get my tuna sandwich from Tesco and not really contribute much, hopefully not see anyone and go home. If that's the mentality, then that's not responsible, because it's ultimately all about you. And you have to try and consider where you're going, the destination that you're going to. Are you bringing something in? Are you contributing to the local economy? Are you keeping things going? Are you creating jobs as a result? If you have that mindset, then that's responsible. Obviously, part of it as well. If you're traveling locally, that's great for the environmental footprint. Where are you staying? If you can do that in an environmental way, are you recycling when you go as well? Waste is a big part of travel as well. Tourism. Sometimes you could be someone who recycles domestically at home, but sometimes you forget that when you travel. You just focus on getting from A to B. So there's a lot to think about as an actual traveller. As a business, you certainly want to try and keep things as online as you can, to keep the carbon footprint down. And just coming back to what we were just saying about the need to raise awareness of areas that are particularly busy. I think credit to people like the Loch Lomond Tourism Board this year. They've been quite good at highlighting when car parks are heaving. They'll put marketing images up of, Ben Ann is full. Sure, Ben Ann's always full. But here's a picture of the car park. Is this really what you want today? Go somewhere else. These are the alternatives. And that kind of very proactive approach to demarketing certain locations is a very sustainable way of getting things done. And anyone looking at that would surely go, oh yeah, that sounded like a good idea, but you know what? That's not what I had in mind. I'm going to look at somewhere else, not too far away. That's the kind of approach that we need in order to spread the word. And if we can keep that online, then all the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And that has the benefit that, some areas that perhaps haven't received a lot of attention in recent years get benefit perhaps of redirected visitors. I wonder, Gregor, if I can bring you in at this point. I'm aware that Croatia has had a debate around what we'd call over-tourism, for the last 10 years. It's quite an acute debate, because as you say, that a great deal of jobs in Croatia depend on this. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how Croatia has managed that, and particularly managed the involvement of local communities in that debate.
Right. Well, just a few figures. Yeah, we a few years ago we had 57.5 million tourists, and Croatia is a country of roughly more than 4 million citizens. So almost 14 tourists per citizen, and that's really a lot.
Wow.
So we had places. Maybe the most well-known is Dubrovnik, but there are also others that you think world famous Plitvice lakes, and just other places that were overly crowded. And are the red light system. Side, it was like a big circus. They employ a couple of cruise ships arriving every day, kind of spitting out thousands of persons, thousands of tourists every time. So that, and we did in Dubrovnik by kind of reducing also the outdoor space for restaurants, because everything was already covered with tables and seats and or chairs and tables. We have definitely increased prices. And I don't say the kind of the state ordered prices for cafes to be increased, but they did increase definitely. And which had kind of the maybe not so legal effect that there was with a certain code that Croatians could get things for a much cheaper price. Maybe I shouldn't say that because I think in the European Union this is not really how it should be, but it was, and sometimes still is. I think in Dubrovnik you pay for a cup of coffee sometimes about 10 euros, and in Croatia you're used to paying not more than 1 or maximum 2. So this kind of the price. First of all, we tried to reduce numbers. Around the Plitvice Lakes, there was a visitor management plan saying that we need to limit the number of visits to 10,000 a day. And we have introduced an electronic voucher system. So you needed to purchase your voucher in advance, about 48 hours in advance, otherwise you just couldn't go there. People, however, were kind of, we hope that we catched all of them. They were informed in advance. So because what we also did not want to do is to frustrate people who came to visit our country, and then they can't visit those sites they wanted to see. I think one important was that we, with one exception, the city of Zadar, which is on the Adriatic coast as well, just north of Split. With that exception, we did not we tried to avoid the low-cost airlines a bit because they bring lots and lots of tourists who normally do not want to spend that much money in the country. We were rather trying or aiming for some kind of elite tourism, to increase also the level of service and to be no low-cost destination anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Lots for Scotland to reflect upon there. Yeah, very, very interesting. I wonder if I can now ask Vicki, part of the over-tourism debate, I think, has often been concentrated around particular areas of Scotland where there's quite an acute pressure. So thinking particularly, Edinburgh at Christmas time in August with the festivals, but also some of our islands in the summer as well. Do you think that going forward we might see a shift away from that seasonality and the concept of a festival to something that's more a year-round, slower offering?
I mean, I think that would be fantastic, and certainly the focus of Visit Scotland's activity has always been trying to address that seasonal imbalance, so trying to stimulate that demand for the quieter months. So I think, coming out of this, what is a really important, and I agree with Neil in terms of that definition of responsible tourism. For me, there's 3 pillars to that. And at the heart of it is definitely communities, and that social, and communities, we need communities engaged, and we need to get the right balance of visitors for each community across the year. And that's going to vary across the country. And I think if we can do that, and we can put communities at the heart of our planning, which very much actually the 2030, the new tourism strategy does, is put far more emphasis on how we work with communities and how we strive to get that balance so that we address those issues. But we ensure that geographic and seasonal spread of visitors across the year. So I think that has to be a big focus of how we come out of this, that you're absolutely right, we address those imbalances and we work closely with communities to do that. And as you say, that then also tackles the third element, the environmental aspect as well. And talking about, Neil also talked about travelling with purpose, and I think what we're seeing there is definitely we want to be getting to audiences that share those values, that are going to want to engage with our local communities and respect our local communities, and buy local when they're in there, and enjoy that slow and immersive travel. And so I think if we can get our targeting right, we can work together, and we can put communities at the heart of our planning. We're discoverable, and we work together to address what the building demand, but in a way that gives us that all year round, as you say, proposition. Then we would be in good shape.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great to achieve.
Absolutely.
Neil, I wonder, are there any areas in Scotland where you think they're just crying out for a bit of redistribution of that demand? Where would you like to see really thrive over the next 5 years?
Well, Southern Scotland's always been the favourite one in that sense. The borders, Dumfries and Galloway, Ayrshire, they've always had there's been a big difference between the north, particularly islands like Skye, which are just constantly chocker. But even within that, over-tourism isn't as simple as saying Skye's a serious problem, because South Skye, there's nowhere near the same numbers. So it's generally half a dozen hotspots on a place like Skye, which are completely out of control. But we just need to get certain messages out that actually, if you go a mile down the road, you'll have just as nice a place entirely to yourself. And that is where marketing comes in, and that's where coming back to social media being a cause for good, if we can get something. So it's certainly South Scotland, even parts of Central Scotland though, because the international visitors traditionally would come flying to Edinburgh, Glencoe, Loch Ness, Skye, maybe an island or two more, and then go home. If we can try and spread that around to some of the other islands, and also parts, as I say, of Central Scotland, areas like, well, Stirling's always been a popular one, but Falkirk's not so far away, and with the Kelpies, with Calendar House there, potentially as well the Lothians, even just spilling out of Edinburgh. So East Lothian has some of the best historical sites in the country, no question. As does West Lothian. The Outlander effect, of course, has been huge. And that has done an enormous amount for regions like Fife, which have really taken off as a result of the filming locations that were used in Fife and part of the Lothians as well. And Glasgow and Lanarkshire as well. I'd like to always see more people here because it's got the capacity for it, it's got the infrastructure for it, and it's my home city, so why not?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, homes they're always very close to our hearts. I grew up in Inverclyde, and it's got a huge cruise ship industry. Tens of thousands of international visitors will go off at Greenock and then go off and do Edinburgh, Glasgow, Glencoe, might go up to an island, and there's some fantastic tourism experiences to be had locally and a bit closer to home. So yeah, that mentality I'd like to see develop more over the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. Neil, I wonder if I could ask you, we've spoken a little bit about the impact particularly on island communities. I wonder if you have any insight into how our islands are doing at the moment and how they've fared particularly this year.
Yeah, I took a strategic decision to avoid them in terms of all my work this year. I haven't been to any, which is appalling. That's really depressing, and I can actually say it in those words. But I just decided I didn't want to get involved in that. I know that a lot of island people have been very much the opposite mindset of please come, please bring business. But when lockdown was at its peak, there was so much messaging coming out of the island saying we don't want visitors, please do not come here. We don't have the infrastructure, we can't have. If there's an outbreak here, we're going to have a serious problem. And I just think it would have been irresponsible for me to have gone and promoted these areas, even when things started to look good in the summer. I just made a decision to sit it out. So I've not spoken to many businesses there, but those that I have, it's been very mixed between those who are saying, please come, and those who are saying, no, don't bother, come back next year. That's my personal experience of it.
Yeah, and there's kind of two elements to that confidence. It's the confidence in the local communities, but also the consumer confidence as well. In travellers, feeling confident to, firstly from a COVID security point of view, to travel to places around Scotland, but also that they're not causing additional impact to those local communities, which have already been through a lot. Vicki, I wonder, you'd mentioned that the tourism strategy for 2030. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about that and what it's going to look like and what we'll hear from Visit Scotland going forward on that.
So the tourism strategy, Tourism Outlook 2030, is very much, it's not a Visit Scotland document, it's an industry document. It's one that we all own and have a role in, I guess, delivering. And there are a number of strands to that, and actually it's been reflected very much in the STERG plan. So we've obviously, you'll know from very early on during lockdown, the Scottish Tourism Emergency Response Group was brought together again. It had been together when we'd experienced other global crises in tourism, and it came together to look at setting out plans for how we were going to respond. Mm-hmm. And as the kind of weeks and months have gone on, and I think we moved out of that response phase, which was very much about supporting businesses and securing funding and helping businesses to think about restart. The action plan for STERG has kind of taken on more of the structure of the 2030 strategy. So It looks at areas like how we are going to support our businesses, how we're going to develop our people, how we are going to put place and community at the heart of our planning and thinking, as I was kind of referring to earlier. And it looks at cross-cutting themes like digital and our capability, and how we, the skills we're going to need in the future, how we're going to attract talent into the industry, and how we are going to support the businesses on their digital journey, and then equally what investment is going to be required. So in many ways, the STERG action plan has now become the action plan of the strategy and is reflecting all of those kind of key themes. But it's got responsible tourism absolutely at its heart, and place very much, at the centre of that, which, I think is good. And, a big focus as well within that, picking up on the environmental aspect of responsible tourism, as well as about the greening of the industry and what can we all do, not just in protecting our special places, but actually if we are going to be leaders in 21st century tourism, how do we actually, tackle the ambition to be carbon neutral?
Yes. Absolutely, and that's something that I often hear from our younger travellers, that actually Scotland could be quite difficult to get around if you don't have access to a car, which many of our younger travellers, might not now, whether for cost or environmental choice reasons. Certainly a lot to grapple with there. Gregor, I wonder, does Croatia have something similar? Do you have a recovery plan? What does that look like in terms of getting the success story of Croatian tourism back on track for 2021? Oh, I think you're on mute, Gregor.
You're right. Thank you. Well, the recovery plan for 2021 has probably less to do with sustainability and more to do with kind of getting it right in kind of getting the finances right, because so many businesses are struggling. But sustainability has been already in somewhat kind of focus of some initiatives throughout Croatia. There's, for example, the Mali Lošinj, the self-pronounced island of vitality. They have projects for natural resource protection, protection of space, biodiversity, waste concepts, everything. They try to be really good, also in the eyes of a very modern traveler. And the modern traveler is a traveler that has a certain eye on sustainability and wants to have a choice, kind of, or when he or she has a choice between a more or less sustainable way to do holiday, the more sustainable way will be chosen. And we in Croatia, since we love our country, we perceive ourselves now for the last decade already as a kind of as a luxury destination, because the nature is the luxury by itself. And we try kind of to bring this in line with also the real, or the luxury in service and other categories, so that we can move up the category of tourism in Croatia from, say, from a mid-level kind of to an upper mid-level, also in the eyes of the traveler. But I keep fingers crossed. I have been to Scotland already 5 times for vacation. It was always fantastic. I love it. I hope to be back very soon. And I hope that these measures are going away very soon.
Oh, we hope to welcome you back soon, Gregor, and we wish Croatia all the best as well with its recovery. A lot of interesting stuff there which Scotland can learn from. At this moment, I think what we'll do is we'll open up the chat function. So the chat function should be the second icon on the menu at the top of your screen. If you click into there, show conversation, you should be able to type to ask a question of any of our panelists. So while you're all hopefully typing away, I'll just ask Neil, if I may, going into 2021, what would be your one wish for the industry?
I want to see international visitors back. I really miss them. I think that they bring an enthusiasm for Scotland, which is very, very special. I think it's just human nature. You don't necessarily fully appreciate what's on your doorstep, and locals, as much as they're getting to know Scotland more, which I think is great. When a lot of, particularly Americans, come here. They have often, this is a bucket list trip for them. It's a once in a lifetime thing. They've looked forward to it their whole life. They consider themselves to be Scottish through lineage. And I would like to see the opportunity for those visitors to come back, because they do add something.
Fantastic. And Vicki, if I could ask the same question of you, your one wish for 2021 for the industry.
So I agree with Neil. That's going to be really important. So for me, it's that the businesses are going to get the support they need to get to 2021, because we need to have to create a vibrant visitor economy. You know, we need our attractions and our accommodation providers to survive this. So more support for the industry, I think, so that we have a great start to 21.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we've got some questions coming through from our panelists. Vicki, this is perhaps one for you. We've got a question from Mel. She's wondering how you feel about the job support scheme, and whether the closure of that really fits in with what Scotland's trying to achieve in the tourism sector.
So, yeah, I think the industry, through Scottish Tourism Alliance, through the task force, the task force which the Minister set up, has obviously fed back on a number of the interventions that are going to be required to support the industry, both short term and long term. And I think, you know, the certainly what's come back from industry, and I think that's all important here in terms of what they're going to need in order to be able to retain talent. It'll need to go further,
yeah,
than what we have now.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got another question here. Neil, this is perhaps one that you might have a view on. Kerry asks about the concept of corporate social responsibility in the industry, and acknowledges that's perhaps, you know, not been high up the agenda, understandably, over the last 7 to 8 months. But, you know, with the concept of, you know, giving back to our communities and giving back to key workers in particular, do you think we're going to start to see more industry emphasis on corporate social responsibility?
I certainly hope so. I think that's the way that it needs to go. If we're all in this together, then that's the kind of mentality that you need to have, particularly in the rural areas, wherever possible, in terms of your employment, recruitment and everything like that, how you treat staff, the kind of contracts that you give staff. I mean, that's vital. It's the kind of industry that it is a volatile industry. It's not a secure industry, and I think it was very early on that we kind of understood that hospitality and tourism were going to be hit very, very severely by this, because it is a social industry and this is not a social time we're living in. So if we're all in it together, then it's, yeah, for the bigger corporations and the employers, they have to look after the staff and tap into to forming a closer relationship with not just their customers, but everyone that's involved in tourism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We've got another question here from Jess. Vicki, this is perhaps one for you. Jess asks, how do you manage the tension between making our environments COVID secure, but also maintaining their historic beauty? Jess is thinking, for example, of the barriers in the streets in Edinburgh, which have been widened the pavements to ensure better social distancing, but that's been very controversial from a historic beauty perspective. How do you manage that debate?
I mean, it's that is a difficult one, isn't it? What we've not been able to do this year is actually run our normal visitor survey, which would give us a feel for the actual experience. You know, I think we all know that in these very strange times, people expect additional measures to be in place to support social distancing, to keep everybody safe. So, you know, I would hope that actually there is that understanding that you know, it's there for a reason, and that people can still actually enjoy you know, Scotland, and it doesn't detract from that visitor experience. But I suppose what we are missing is that data to tell us, well, actually, how has, you know, the experience been, because it inevitably will have felt a little bit different. So it's a difficult one, isn't it? Not one that I envy for the town planners and others that are involved in that.
No, a lot of difficult issues to grapple with there. Neil, is that something that you have a view on? I'm conscious you've been out and about, you've been able to travel a lot over the last few weeks. In terms of your travel experience, is that something you feel has, impinged on that historic natural beauty?
Yeah, the visitor attractions, I think there's an understanding that staff are doing a really good job. Everyone has generally been very patient. I think they've probably had one or two difficult customers, but generally the process has been well respected. You have to book in advance for attractions now. You have to commit to going at certain times, which can affect the freedoms that you perhaps used to have as a tourist. And of course, there's the procedures in terms of social distancing, hand sanitisation and everything like that comes with being an attraction. If that's the new norm, I think that's not a huge problem, and I think we'll adjust quite quickly to that kind of change. But it is a little bit different, and it does feel a little bit as if you are on a conveyor belt in a one-way system working your way around an attraction, whereas you used to be able to just float around and do your own thing. It's much better than nothing, no question of that, but is it quite the same? No. So we're just going to have a mental adjustment to the changes that are going to have to be in place.
Yeah, I think, Emma, if I could just come in that, I think, it's going to feel very different, but I think one of the positives is that it actually maybe feels a bit more like a personal experience because numbers are limited, and certainly where you've got attractions that are guided or there's a storytelling element, actually it's going to feel maybe a little bit more personal because people are doing it in smaller numbers. I think that's one of the upsides.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's really, really interesting. So that concept of doing something quite special and unique.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. So before I bring it to a close, I've got one last question for you both, and that is, what would success look like come spring 2021? Do you want to go first, Vicki?
What would success look come spring 2021?
Yes. So I guess March, April time, when we're hopefully in a better place.
Yes, we are absolutely in a better place. We've got air corridors or more international travel. We see a great start to the kind of Easter period with Scotland punching above its weight in the domestic market, because again, I think that's going to be really important. So businesses survive through the winter. We see that strong domestic intent, and we see the start of international travel again. That would be great.
That would be fantastic, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And then, same question to you, Neil. What would success look like for you?
A vaccine would be good. I think we want to try and, definitely as Vicki says, focus on getting the right kind of flow of international travel back. Hopefully hold on to the air routes that will bring visitors here, and just get the virus under much greater control over the winter. And it's going to be a tough winter for everybody, I think that seems obvious, but if we can really get the kind of progress that we made in the spring and early summer back, then that'll be terrific. And a shift in mentality from the staycation, the local travellers, I think, as well, rather than the mindset of it's on my doorstep, I don't really need to spend a lot of money, I don't need to invest in it because I'm saving up for that big holiday to Spain next year. If you can then have the mentality of, actually, if I save up and spend the same amount that I would spend in Spain, but do it here and have 2 or 3 weeks exploring Scotland, rather than just day trips here and there where you take a packed lunch, that's a very different kind of visitor in terms of the industry. So two things: if we can get more international visitors through the airlines and through the right procedures in terms of dealing with the virus, and also just getting local visitors to think more about really properly investing in the industry and having a really immersive Scottish experience.
Fantastic. And yeah, I think, as Vicki said, that falls on all of us. We've all got a role to play in that and making sure that story's told. So I'll certainly be keeping my fingers crossed that come March, April, I'll be catching up with you and we're in a better place. It just falls to me really to thank Vicki, Neil and Gregor for a really excellent session. I've certainly found it very stimulating, interesting, lots of things to reflect upon. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you also to our audience and for everyone that asked questions. I hope you all stay safe and well, and we'll hopefully see you next time round for another session discussing hopefully when things are in a better place in the spring. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.